Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to get started in just a few seconds here. We're going to give people a chance to log on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. We are going to start in just about 30 seconds. We still have folks that are logging in. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. I am super excited about our webinar today, which is supporting neurodiverse youth through executive function development. But before that, we are just going to do a brief introduction of IYI. For 3 decades, the Indiana Youth Institute has supported the youth services field through innovative trainings, critical data, and capacity building resources, aiming every effort at increasing our well-being of all children. Our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, organizations, and communities that are focused on kids and youth supporting you. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Please use the chat function. We can do that right now. So if we are logged in, go ahead and go into the chat and introduce yourself with your name and where you work. And then please also use the Q&A function to submit a question to our presenter. We will, throughout the webinar, pause so that we can ask those questions. You're able to write those in, and then if you see a question that you like or would also like answered, you can go ahead and upvote that so we know which ones to prioritize. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker. Ellen Herdish works at Northwest Suburban Psychology, and she's going to talk to us today about executive function development. Ellen?
Thanks, Josh. Hey, everybody. Let's see. Let me get my screen shared here. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat too. Josh or Aaron, will you guys let me know what you're seeing come through if any faces?
Got it.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's get this started. So like Josh mentioned, today I'm going to be talking us through how we can work to support neurodiverse youth through executive function development. So first, just a little bit about me and my background. I have my bachelor's in psychology. After college, I went on to do an internship in foster care for a year. That was an interesting experience. I got to work with a lot of kids from really chaotic backgrounds, a lot of trauma, neglect, effects of HIV and AIDS in their communities. After that, I went on to get my master's in psychology. During grad school, I did a ton of training and got a lot of experience in pediatric neuropsychology. So some of you might be familiar with that. We use neuropsych evaluations to help guide treatment recommendations, gain a better understanding of, where some of the challenges that we're seeing in kids, where those might be stemming from. So that has been a really helpful lens to sort of continue to inform my work as I've moved on from grad school. And then the biggest piece of my work now is involving a lot of training and practice in the implementation of conscious discipline. So all of my work with parents, teachers, outside providers really stems from this foundation of my knowledge and training in conscious discipline. So we'll talk a lot more about that as we go through the presentation. Previously, I worked as a director at a therapeutic preschool here in Chicago. And most recently, I've moved on to work at a different practice in the suburbs. Now I'm able to focus solely on my parent coaching work, again, using that conscious discipline framework, and then also do some work as an SEL consultant for organizations like IYI. Also, I'm curious to know a little bit about you guys. So if you would just chime in the chat, let me know what age group you work with, sort of what your role is, what that looks like. We'll talk through a ton of examples as we get through this presentation. And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to tailor some of that specifically to what would be most helpful for you and your work. So chime in the chat. If you work with early childhood, elementary age, middle school, high school, adults, we all work with adults. So I joke all the time that I'm conscious disciplining the adults in my life way more than any of the kids in my life. So some of these ideas will definitely apply there too. One other thing to chat about quick just before we jump into this, please, please, please feel free to chime in with any questions, comments, bring up something that you want to discuss further. I want this presentation to be as helpful to you as possible. And so if there's something that I mentioned but don't really dive into that you're curious about, drop it in the chat. Josh and Aaron are helping me keep track of that, and they'll be sure to interrupt me if we need to. And the Q&A function, that I haven't seen that on Zoom yet, so I'm interested to see how that goes. Okay, so just a little roadmap of what we'll be getting into today. First, we'll do a quick overview of neurodiversity. What does that mean? What does that sort of encompass? Then we'll chat a little bit about executive functioning in general. What is it? How does it develop? We'll talk a little bit about some of the executive dysfunction we tend to see in neurodiverse youth. Then I'll give a brief introduction to conscious discipline in general as a little bit of an overview. We'll talk through conscious discipline's brain state model. That is going to give us a lens for helping to understand behavior in a different way so that we can really respond to it in a way that is thoughtful and productive and really supports the development of some of these skills that we're looking for. And then the bulk of our time, we will spend digging into what are some of the strategies and interventions that we can use to support executive function development for anyone, but particularly for neurodiverse youth. All right, so first, neurodiversity. What do we mean when we're talking about this? Neurodiversity has become a really popular term for describing differences in the way that people's brains work. And so, of course, that can encompass a wide range of strengths, challenges, is really talking about how do we perceive and respond to the world. So what is our experience of that? Forms of neurodiversity, we see ADHD is very typical. Autism spectrum disorder and other learning disorders sort of officially fall under that umbrella of neurodiversity. But the term neurodiversity has also evolved to include a much broader group of people now who identify as neurodiverse. So there's really no formal diagnosis required. And oftentimes people will consider themselves to be neurodiverse, so they haven't had any sort of formal evaluation, any diagnosis, but they just feel like they're sort of moving through the world in a different way. So let's talk just briefly about those main three that I talked about first. So ADHD, there are three different types of ADHD that you could be diagnosed with. We have sort of two different categories of symptoms that we see with ADHD. So we see the symptoms of inattention, we see the symptoms of hyperactive impulsivity. So when you're being evaluated for ADHD, we sort of check all the boxes. What are we seeing? What does this look like for you? And then determine, do you meet criteria for a diagnosis? So if you are mostly inattentive, then we get that diagnosis of the primarily inattentive type. If more of your symptoms fall in that hyperactive impulsive type, then that is what we get. But most typically we see enough symptoms from both categories that we would diagnose ADHD combined type. So the diagnosis is based on those symptoms, and then we categorize it ranging from either mild to severe. Autism spectrum disorder. Some of the challenges we see here are challenges related to social communication, those interactions. We often see restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. And this disorder is often accompanied by delays in language, movement, cognitive skills. But remember, this is on a spectrum. So we see a wide range of functioning within a diagnosis of ASD. And then just a bit about learning disorders. When we think about learning disorders, we're talking about challenges with learning certain academic subjects. So you can receive a diagnosis of specific learning disorder with impairment in reading, what we typically think of as dyslexia. Impairment in mathematics is dyscalculia, and then impairment in written expression is dysgraphia. So what we're looking for in making a diagnosis of a learning disorder is, are our skills below what would be expected for age, grade, cognitive capabilities? So someone who has a learning disorder in one of these specific areas, you receive, process, or communicate that information in a different way. So now let's talk a little bit more about executive functioning in general. So executive functioning, what is it? These are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks successfully. So all of these skills that work together in a coordinated way to help us move through the world. Here's a quick list of the executive functioning skills that we'll be talking about today. We'll go through each of these in much more detail as we get further along in the presentation, but first, just an intro. These are the things that we're considering. So attention, time management, organization, prioritization, working memory, impulse control, flexibility, mental flexibility, empathy or emotional awareness. I sometimes talk about it that way. Metacognition, goal achievement, task initiation, and emotional control. So you can see under that umbrella of executive functioning, we have a lot of different specific skills. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. When I first started thinking about executive functioning, just in my training and work, if you had asked me, how's your executive functioning? I probably would have said, it's great. Except when you break it down into all of these different pieces. So when we're going through the descriptions later on, think for yourself too, what skills are really strong for me and what skills could use a little bit of work, just as a way to sort of give us a little bit of perspective. So when we think about the way that executive functioning develops, it's important to remember that we're born with the potential to develop these skills. We sort of have all of the building blocks necessary, but we rely really heavily on scaffolding from our environment. So that is what we're going to work on taking advantage of when we're talking about how do we support some of the development of these skills, is that it becomes up to us to sort of lend our skills, provide that scaffolding in the environment that allows for these pieces to be put together in a way that ends in some of these skills being more internalized and kids being more independent with that. So when we're thinking about that scaffolding and that support from the environment, some kids require a little bit more support than others. Typically, we see that with kids who have some form of neurodiversity. So challenges that we often that we see with executive functioning are often associated with neurodiversity, ADHD especially. We see a ton of executive dysfunction, but then again, you can have executive dysfunction and not be formally diagnosed with anything. Executive functioning is also impacted by things like sleep, stress, hunger. So when I was talking before about what are some of the skills that you're really strong at, even those things that might typically come really easily to you when you are tired or preoccupied or stressed out or feeling emotional, those skills tend to take a little bit of a dip. All right, let's talk a little bit more about executive functions in neurodiverse youth. So when we're thinking about executive dysfunction, how does it show up? We see a lot of rigidity, forgetfulness, disorganization, emotional outbursts, inability to see the future, some impulsivity, distractibility, procrastination, poor awareness of time, trouble with multi-step tasks. So when we're thinking about how this shows up, these are all the sort of negative side of the things that we don't want. So in ADHD, that one really depends on the type that you have diagnosed. Obviously, if you have those symptoms of inattention, then attention is going to be a challenge for you. I have a lot of families that I work with whose kids have been diagnosed with ADHD. And when we look at that list of executive functioning skills, they sort of get this overwhelmed look on their face. And they're like, oh my gosh, my kid really struggles with all of these. Like, can we have some help with all of these? Where in some presentations, it's a little bit more narrow. We have a lot of impulsivity in kids with ADHD. The emotional control can be really challenging for those kids too. So with ADHD, it really just depends on the type that's diagnosed. With autism spectrum disorder, things that we typically see around rigidity, some of that control, that inflexibility, emotional outbursts are pretty typical. Oftentimes there are some challenges with that empathy or emotional awareness when it comes to that perspective taking. So those are some areas that we see typically be more challenging for kids with autism spectrum disorder. And then when we have learning disorders, say a lot of what is common there is some inattention. It's really hard to pay attention to something that is challenging for you. A lot of times our brains are just trying to check out from that. We see some procrastination, some of that anxious avoidance of, again, tasks that are challenging. It's difficult for them to persist and achieve goals. And oftentimes we see that low frustration tolerance too.
Ellen,
Right.
before we move on,
Yeah.
there were a couple of questions.
Sure.
You can either address them now or maybe you'll address them later. The first is, would an auditory processing disorder be considered to fall under the neurodivergent umbrella?
I would say, yeah, we can definitely consider that when we think back to the slide that was talking about just differences in how we perceive and experience the world, that absolutely falls under that umbrella.
Gotcha. And then the second one, and I imagine you'll get to this at some point, but how does childhood trauma affect the cognitive development of a neurodivergent person versus a neurotypical person?
Yeah, a lot of times what we see there is just some of the lack of that scaffolding. And those early childhood experiences really have an impact on the way that part of our brain is wired up. So I didn't talk about this quite yet, but the part of our brain that's responsible for those executive functions is your prefrontal cortex. So if you see me doing this throughout the presentation, I'm trying to refer to that prefrontal cortex. That part of your brain structurally isn't fully wired up until you're 25. And so that wiring looks a little bit different when you've had some of those early adverse childhood experiences, trauma, neglect. A lot of those things have a really significant impact on the way that your brain becomes wired up, because it's wired more in the direction of like ensuring safety, self-protection, some of those defenses, rather than wiring in the direction of like in a safe, connected environment where that part of your brain can sort of be on autopilot. So it definitely looks a little bit different when we have some of that trauma.
Yep. And one more came in, if you don't mind. When ADHD impacts memory, would that also be considered a learning disability? And maybe just talk about a little bit about the difference between a learning disability and being neurodiverse.
Sure. So when we have a learning disability and thinking about how ADHD impacts that, those can be sometimes hard to tease apart, right? Am I having a challenge with reading because I actually have a challenge in the way that I'm learning reading? Or is it more a result of my inattention? I'm not learning it because I'm struggling to pay attention. So when we have neuropsych evaluations, that oftentimes can help us to sort of tease that apart. Sometimes when we get to the end of a neuropsych eval, we say, it could be a little bit of both. Let's try first treating the inattention and really working to support some of that, and then see, do my reading skills improve, or is there still this lingering challenge with reading in particular? So I think that definitely can be tricky to tell the difference. There was part of that question about when attention impacts memory too. Can you read that again for me, Josh?
Yes. So it says, when ADHD impacts memory, is that also considered a learning disability?
I think ADHD and memory in general are tied together pretty closely, because if you aren't paying attention to something, then you won't remember it because it's not getting in to begin with. A lot of times I think about attention as partially the gateway to some of these other executive functioning skills, just because you do need to be attending to the information in order to be able to benefit from it. So I think because ADHD falls under that umbrella of neurodiversity, that then the symptoms associated with ADHD are also sort of thrown in the mix, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else from that before we keep going?
Nope, that's it for now.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, so in digging into this, let's first talk just a little bit about conscious discipline. Anytime I do these presentations, I think it's really helpful to put this quote from Dr. Becky Bailey. She's the creator of conscious discipline. She says, discipline is not something you do to children. It is something you develop within them. And I think that's a really important mindset shift for us to have. It's very different from more old school methodology or approaches. And it's really talking about how do we develop some of these skills within kids so that they carry that on through their life and can be more independent with this, thinking more about that idea of self-discipline rather than discipline as sort of equated to punishments. So just something to sort of marinate on. So when we're thinking about conscious discipline, it's a trauma responsive, evidence-based program and approach that incorporates research from neuroscience, child development, psychology. A big piece of conscious discipline focuses on social emotional learning and specifically the development of skills for emotion regulation. So we'll talk a lot more about that emotion regulation piece as we keep going. The idea is that we have to be in a regulated state to either use a skill that we do have or be available to learn a new skill. And so that's something important to keep in mind as we talk more about how do we support the development of some of these executive functioning skills. We have to first make sure that we're doing the work to ensure that those kids are in a regulated state where they can benefit from some of the strategies that we're working to implement to support these skills. So some of the mindset shifts that we work to adopt when we're thinking about using this conscious discipline framework, we're working to recognize that all behavior is communication. So the behavior that we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's driven by a big piece underlying. So that could be an unmet need, missing skills. So that gets into our next point, things that we would typically classify as misbehavior, that sort of unwanted behavior, some of those more negatively termed pieces that I talked about before when we were getting into that idea of executive dysfunction. Instead of seeing it as misbehavior, we want to see the flip side of that. Well, what's the missing skill here? And then we're working to teach those missing skills through human interactions, not lecture. We're sort of working to be the change we wish to see, right? Lend our skills to that child so that they can experience that and really have that modeling and that example of what that looks like and how to internalize some of those skills on their own. And then we're also working to shift away from more fear-based motivation. So fear of consequences, fear of punishment, and working to create instead a culture of connection and support, that I feel like I can learn these skills and build these skills through making mistakes and understanding what can I do differently, because I'm open to your feedback and I'm open to support, because I have that felt sense of safety and connection that allow me to really be in that regulated state where I can learn. So another big piece of conscious discipline, this is one of the skills that I talk about a lot with families, is this skill of positive intent. So that gets back into seeing misbehavior as a missing skill. We're really working to see the best in others. So give them the benefit of the doubt, recognize everybody's doing the best they can with the skills that they have moment to moment. So this other idea that we have to see children differently, especially those that are most challenging, before they can behave differently. So the way that we think about kids, the ideas that we have, the sort of narrative that we've created about them really impacts the way that we interact with them. And so if we have this more negatively skewed idea, this child is lazy, they're so disruptive, they're disrespectful, then that puts me in a more negative mindset when I'm interacting with them, versus recognizing, okay, this kid's having a really hard time. There's something going on for them, that they're having a hard time paying attention, or they don't have the skills yet to really manage their emotions and communicate that effectively and resolve that effectively. So now I'm in the mindset of, how can I best support them? How do I respond in a way that supports the development of some of those missing skills, rather than what we see with more old school methodology, where oftentimes kids were being punished for not using skills that they don't have. So choosing to see sort of the best in kids is really going to set us up to be that supportive presence. All right, let's talk through conscious discipline's brain state model. We'll give a quick overview just to help give us that different lens to recognize and understand behavior a little bit differently. So we're thinking about this brain state model. There are 3 different brain states. So at any given time, somebody is in one of 3 brain states. I always like to talk first about sort of best case scenario, highest level of functioning. We are calling that our executive state. So you can see on this little brain here, the part of the brain that's shaded in that green part, that's the prefrontal cortex that I was talking about before. So from this executive state, I'm calm, alert, relaxed. My brain is ready to learn. I'm looking for ways to solve my problems. I'm open to feedback. I'm open to solutions. I'm very curious. And I have access to all of those higher level skills that I've tucked into my toolkit over time. So things like logic and reasoning, perspective taking, impulse control, and behavioral inhibition. Mental flexibility, all of those higher level skills, those executive skills that we're going to talk a ton about, they live in this executive state. So if I'm in an executive state and I have the skill that's needed for that moment, then I can pull it off, no problem. But the tricky part is that anytime something doesn't go our way, we dip down into what we'll call the emotional state. So now you can see on the diagram, we're functioning out of a totally different part of our brain now, a more primitive part of our brain. So now we no longer have access to the skills that live in that executive state. It's not that we don't have those skills, we just can't get to them in that moment. So now the skills that we have access to, heavy air quote on skills from this emotional state, this would be things like the verbal aggression, name calling, blaming, some of that social aggression, manipulation, I hate you, you're the worst, you made me, you never let me, you always make me. Any of that really emotional language is coming out of our emotional state. So there's this sense that I'm having this feeling, I don't know how to regulate it from within, so my best bet is to throw whatever I can out at the environment to try to get the world to go back to going my way, because if the world's going my way, I don't have to be upset, and then there's no negative emotion to have to regulate. So it's an unconscious process where we're just trying to throw whatever we can out to hope that something sticks. When I'm in the emotional state, there's this feeling of being unheard, misunderstood, nobody cares, nobody's listening. So just this sense of being really disconnected. So the underlying need for somebody in that emotional state is a need for a felt sense of connection. So all of the skills, strategies, language that we use to support somebody in their emotional state are all in service of reestablishing that felt sense of connection. So then the lowest brain state is called the survival state. The survival state is triggered when there's a perceived threat. Now, I think it's helpful to hover on the point of the perception of a threat for just a minute. Yes, definitely your survival state should be activated when there's an objective threat to your physical safety, right? If I'm driving down the road and a car swerves into my lane, it's really important for me to be able to have a fast physical reaction to protect myself from harm. And the survival state is also triggered when there's a perceived threat to emotional safety or social safety, a threat to what I want, a threat to what I had planned. For adults, a lot of times what sends us to our survival state is a perceived threat to our authority. That can be sort of tricky for us to manage. So just this perception of a threat that activates that survival state turns on that alarm system within our body. And so from our survival state, the skills that we have access to are more of that physical acting out. So that fight, flight, freeze behavior. Kids who tend to have more of a fight response, you'll see that physical acting out, hitting, kicking, biting, swiping things off their desks, tipping a chair over, clenching your fist, stomping your feet. A flight response looks more like just fleeing the scene. We just leave. That freeze response can be a little bit trickier to identify as the survival state response because it's more internalized. So it's this really withdrawn, shut down behavior. Sometimes I think about it like lights are on, but nobody's home. You can just tell that that kid's not processing anything that's going on. So it's just this really shut down, internalized response. So if the survival state is triggered by a perceived threat, then the way that we work to soothe that part of our brain, move us back towards that regulated state, is to reestablish that felt sense of safety. So the survival state needs safety, the emotional state needs connection, the executive state is looking for ways to solve problems. So we can use this brain state model to help us understand moment to moment what's going on with the kid that we're working with, and what can we do to really support each of those states so that we recognize, okay, they're in this executive state. We're good to work on some of these skills, or they're in their emotional state. They're not available for learning skills. What can I do to really, really support them in their regulation? So how do we use this brain state model to more effectively support kids? I think about it like building a pyramid. So we want kids to be spending as much time as possible in that regulated state so that they can really benefit from the skills that we're trying to instill for them. But that's just the tip of this pyramid, this top green level here. So first we have to really work on this wide base, this foundational piece of a felt sense of safety. Once I feel safe, then I'm willing to be vulnerable and form a genuine connection. So those two pieces, that felt sense of safety and that felt sense of connection, have to happen first. Once we really feel safe and connected, then we're spending more time in that more regulated state where we're available for problem solving and learning new skills. I think sometimes we get caught up in trying to throw new skills at a kid who's not in that regulated state. And that can sort of be like trying to build that pyramid upside down, right? It's not stable. So we want to make sure that we take the time to build that felt sense of safety and connection first. All right, so now let's talk more about these executive skills and how we support the development. So now we'll get into some of the descriptions of what these skills look like in real life. Like I said, keep an ear out for what are some of your strengths, what are challenges that you have, and then maybe you have a couple particular kids in mind that you're thinking about too. So we're thinking about attention. It's our ability to sustain attention despite any distractions, boredom, fatigue. Time management is our ability to estimate how much time we have. How do we allocate it? How do we stay within time limits and deadlines? Also a sense that time is important. I know a lot of kids that don't have that. Sometimes I don't have that. Organization is just our ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information and materials. Prioritization, our ability to see what's most important and make a plan to accomplish it. I think a lot of times in kids and families that I work with, kids and parents just have different priorities. And so that can be a challenge sometimes. When we're thinking about working memory, that's our ability to hold information in our memory while performing complex tasks, our ability to draw on past learning and apply it to the situation at hand, or sort of see into the future. Working memory is often closely tied with attention as well. Just the point that question brought up earlier. If I'm not attending to the information, then it's not getting in. I don't have the information in that working memory to use and sort of make sense of or synthesize with the situation. Impulse control is our ability to think before we act, giving us that chance to evaluate a situation and how our behavior might impact it. Mental flexibility, our ability to revise plans in the face of obstacles, setbacks, new information, or mistakes. So being able to adapt to changing conditions. Empathy is being able to understand what others feel and see from somebody else's point of view. I talk about this too as emotional awareness. Am I aware of somebody else's experience of the situation? Metacognition is our ability to step back and take a bird's eye view of ourselves in a situation. So observe yourself, reflect, be a witness, self-monitor, self-evaluate as you're going through something. Goal achievement, can I set a goal and follow it through to completion? Task initiation is just getting started on something, your ability to begin a project without procrastination in an efficient and timely fashion. And then emotional control, our ability to manage emotions. Emotional control and impulse control are really closely tied. So the strategies that we use to support both are the same, which is really helpful. You get a two for one deal. So feel free to drop in the chat if something is sticking out to you, like, oh gosh. I would say for me, task initiation and flexibility are really challenging, which is helpful because in a lot of families that I work with, their kids have the same challenges. And I'm like, that makes sense to me. I totally get why they're upset. Okay, here's just a quick example, something that comes up a lot in classrooms with parents that I'm working with, this idea of first time listening and sort of what our maybe like our old perspective on it would be. We think that if you listen to me the first time I give you an instruction, then that's just respect. That means that you really respect what I say, you respect my authority. If you're not listening to me, then you're not respecting me. If you're not listening, then maybe I'll label you as defiant, oppositional, that sort of thing. But this idea of first time listening requires all of these skills working together in a really coordinated way. So I have to be able to shift my attention from what I'm doing to what you said, to be able to process that, maybe control the emotions that are coming up, frustration or disappointment or irritation. If I felt like I was in the middle of something and you're bringing this new demand, impulse control, perspective taking, and understanding that there's something about this that's important to you, even though it doesn't feel important to me, maybe. Prioritization, being able to shift away from what I was doing and prioritize somebody else's needs or desires above mine. Planning ahead, how am I going to pause what I'm doing? What does it take to get into this next task? Just getting started on the task analysis and that metacognition. How am I evaluating? How am I making it through this task? And then goal persistence and achievement, making it through to the end of what that expectation is. So when we break it down this way, it's like, oh, okay, no wonder some kids have a really hard time with first time listening because it means so much more. I love this little graphic that I found too. That brain is working really, really hard. Okay, so let's dive into some of these skills and some of the strategies that we use to support these skills. But I guess first, Josh or Aaron, are there any questions that have come up or any comments that would be helpful to pause here and get into?
No, not at the moment. Just as a reminder to use the Q&A function to ask questions. We have about 22 minutes left, and then any comments in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Josh. All right, so first let's jump into supporting impulse control and emotional control. Like I said, those two are really closely related, and so we use the same strategies to support both. The reason that I think it's helpful to talk through this first is, again, that emotion regulation piece becomes really key to being able to access either, again, access the skills that you do have or be available to learn new skills. So when we think about impulse control and emotion regulation, emotional control. These are some of the strategies that we can use to really support those. So teaching routines, having some of that predictability. Predictability really leans into that felt sense of safety and security and knowing what's happening, what to expect. It takes away some of that startle response that can sometimes be added to our emotional experience of, because I had no idea that was going to happen. So teaching routines becomes super important and super helpful for really being able to better manage our emotions and impulses. Teaching stress reduction strategies. So this encompasses a lot of different things. We talk a lot about deep breathing and how we support kids in doing that, just because that really is that sort of first line of defense when we're having an emotional experience is, can I control my own breathing to signal to my brain and my body that this isn't an emergency? I can handle this. I'm going to breathe and calm down and solve my problem. Other stress reduction strategies really can be played off of what works individually for kids. So I have a lot of kids who really like to draw or color, or maybe do a puzzle or sort things, something that sort of brings the energy and the tension down, a really predictable, organized task that can support us being a little bit more grounded in that regulated place. So that can look different for all sorts of kids. Talk about teaching a script for problem solving. That gives our brains a little bit of that mental practice of what might happen. An example that comes up all the time with families that I'm working with is kids and their challenges with losing games, right? I've got a lot of kids who are throwing game boards and tossing cards all over the place. So when we think about a script for problem solving there, it might be, okay, we're going to play Uno and you might win. How will that feel? What can you do to celebrate? You might lose. How will that feel? What can you do with those emotions? So giving their brains that mental practice for a little bit of a preview of here's what might happen. Again, that takes away from the startle response of, I had it in my mind that I was only going to win and now I lost and I don't know how to manage that. When we think about regulating the environment, it's really just thinking about what are the things that we can do in the environment that bring that chaos down. The opposite of chaos is structure. And so a lot of times that's just having things organized and put away in a specific place. When there's some of that structure and order externally, that can be soothing to sort of our perception of the situation and takes away from that ability to really spiral into that emotional place. Downloading calm is a conscious discipline specific term where they're really referring to our ability to share our calm energetically through our energy versus verbally. So this little graphic down here with these brains linking up is what I think about when we're talking about downloading calm. So if I'm totally calm and I can make eye contact with whoever's on the receiving end of that, I can link up and really share my own calm just through that eye contact. We're relying on our mirror neurons in that situation. Mirror neurons in our brain allow us to experience an emotion that we see conveyed on somebody else's face. So just really taking advantage of that and having that be sort of this wireless connection where we can share our calm. Start and stop games are also really important for the development of impulse control. Things like red light, green light, freeze dance, Simon Says, where we are responding to feedback from the environment, whether it's freeze or red light or Simon Says or Simon didn't say, and adjusting our behavior accordingly. That gives our body and our brains that practice of I'm in motion and then I stop. I stopped. My brain was in charge of my body and I was able to stop. So practicing this within the context of some sort of game, or practicing it when you're in a regulated state, gives your body that muscle memory that then once you do get into a more upset place, it's more second nature that you can still respond to those sorts of commands or that feedback from the environment. And then face-to-face games, Conscious Discipline and Dr. Becky Bailey have created these I love you rituals, which are just little like face-to-face little hand clap games. She's taken some familiar nursery rhymes and added a little bit of choreography, tweaked the lyrics a little bit to really get in these 4 ingredients for a moment of connection. So that would be eye contact, touch, presence, and playfulness. Conscious Discipline talks a lot about this idea that connections on the outside build connections on the inside. So they're really talking about taking that time to connect face to face with that eye contact, your presence, and your playfulness. Really works to build the connections in that prefrontal cortex. So the more connected kids feel, the more willing and able they are to cooperate and practice self-control. So incorporating some of these face-to-face games in your daily routine can be really helpful for supporting that impulse control and emotional control. For teens, we can talk about teaching them the brain state model. So that brain state that we just talked through helps to build their awareness. When I'm aware of something, that I can start to shift my behavior in response to that. So for older kids, we think about teaching that brain state model. For supporting attention, this idea of noticing instead of judging really allows us to sort of act as a headlamp. That's what that little blue hat is meant to be, where we help bring kids back to the moment. So if we are walking through a classroom and a kid is sort of spaced out, they were halfway through whatever, if you come up to them, you can say, oh, hey, you were working on that math problem. You're almost finished with it. That brings their attention back to this moment. There's no judgment in that. It's just an objective statement. You were working on that. You're almost finished with that. Versus something that feels a little bit more judgy would be, what are you doing? What are you supposed to be doing right now? Why are you staring off into space? So thinking about how we can sort of objectively reflect back what's happening instead of having that judgment. Attention signals are really helpful. Any sort of like auditory thing. When you're in the grocery store and you hear the chime go off before there's some sort of announcement, that's an attention signal. A lot of teachers have their own sort of callback signals, call and response, that sort of thing. Those really support attention because it helps to bring us, again, back to that present moment. Using a visual depiction of time, this time timer down here is really helpful. It helps time feel more concrete for kids. They can really see it ticking away, and that sort of red portion of the timer shrinks away versus just watching something, digitally tick down on like the microwave timer or an Alexa timer where there's not even really anything to look at. Also using music, movement, rhythm, making tasks fun and interesting, anything to sort of pull that attention. Again, challenges with attention are more related to I can't be in charge of where my attention is. And so adding some sort of interest makes it easier to sort of pull that attention to the task at hand. Using fidget tools can be really helpful to give kids a way to have an outlet for that physical energy while still keeping them with the group. It's sometimes challenging to find the right fidget tool for each kid. I use the language of, is it a tool or a toy? So that can be helpful for kids in giving them a way to reflect too on, is this helpful to me or is it distracting to me? With teens, we talk about identifying personal, societal, global relevance for what they're working on. That can help to build their attention. I'm just looking, we have 10 minutes. Time management, speaking of, is not one of my best skills. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Or if people, I have an idea. Does anybody have something in particular that really stood out that they really wanted to spend more time focusing on? Task initiation or flexibility or that sort of thing. because you guys will have access to these slides, so you can take them with you and sort of have this as a resource available to you. But if there was something that would be more meaningful to really spend more time on, is anything coming up in the chat, Josh?
Yeah, a couple things. Somebody said, multiple people said task initiation. And then after that, there was also a question asking for tips for reinforcing a felt sense of connection and safety. She then responded to say that you're answering it, but maybe you can add a little bit more to that.
Okay.
The task initiation first.
Yeah, let's do task initiation first. The supporting a felt sense of safety and connection is the whole of conscious discipline. So I can't really answer that in a quick way. So let's get into that task initiation, and then other people to chime in if there are other ones that you want to jump into. Like I said, these are all available to you, and a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. So let's talk about task initiation. There we go. Okay, so when we're talking about task initiation, it's just, can you get started with this? It's a really hard thing for a lot of kids. I talk a lot with families about this idea that an object at rest remains at rest, right? Like it's hard to just get up and get going on something, especially if it's something that is bringing up a lot of anxiety or you're avoiding it because it's difficult for you. The doorbell. So when we're thinking about task initiation, helping a child choose options can be super helpful in sort of narrowing the focus and directing their attention to that thing. So I also do this for myself. If I'm looking around my apartment and it has become a disaster zone because I'm stressed or busy doing other things, if I look at it and think, oh my gosh, I have to clean this place, that feels like too much. It's really hard for me to get started that way. But if I look around and I say, all right, I can wash the dishes first, or I can put all of my coats in the closet first. What is going to work better for me? Now I've brought that big overwhelming task down to this tiny sliver of it. Am I doing dishes, or am I putting coats away? Then that gives me a small achievable goal. I can get going on that. And now I've got some momentum. Now I'm not at rest anymore. Now I can build on that. So helping a kid choose options. It's time to start your homework. We can do reading first or math first, or it's time to start your math homework. You can start at the top of the page or the bottom of the page. You can do 2 questions first, or you can do 3 questions first, just whatever it takes to really break that down into something that feels more manageable, more bite-sized. And offering options and choices in that way also gives that sense of shared power, which can be really motivating, that instead of it's something that's happening to me, it's something that I have a say in and something that I can be motivated to move forward in. So that leans into that felt sense of connection. That touches a little bit on that. Verbalizing the beginning of a project is really helpful. That leans on the conscious discipline skill of encouragement, which also builds a felt sense of connection. Whatever it is, 1, 2, 3, let's do it. Or sports teams use this idea when they're in their little huddle and they, okay, 3, 2, 1, go Cubs, or whatever it is. They're verbalizing the beginning of it to sort of unify and really move forward in that. So that can be helpful just to build that awareness. Prompting them or offering choices. So it's time to do whatever, we can do this, what sounds better to you, just like we were talking about options before. Phrases like you did it, good for you, following a successful start. Again, we're just focusing on the getting started piece of it. So if I am trying to encourage myself to get up off the couch and stop scrolling Instagram, I might have to do a little, okay, 3, 2, 1, and I'm up. So verbalizing the beginning of a project, and then I'm not usually telling myself I did it, but maybe I should, because I think it would be helpful. So really whatever works for you in the way that you communicate with kids. You got it. All right. I know somebody who says yay for you, and that I cannot pull that off in a way that sounds genuine. It just sounds snarky. So just thinking about how do we use those tiny little bits of encouragement to keep that momentum going. When kids get older and they have a little bit more of those skills in that area of metacognition and can really start to think through and start to work on their own sort of project management, or how are they getting started, you can start to ask them, what would be your first step? So, okay, we're going to get ready to sit down and do your homework. What might be your first step? I gotta get my backpack, or I should make sure that I have all of my things, or I gotta look at my assignment notebook to remember what it is that I was having to do. So
Um,
become more involved in that.
a comment, somebody said making it into a game can help too. Let's put on the song, how much can we play while racing? It works for that person. And then somebody asked, is there a resource hub for face-to-face games?
Yes. You can look up on YouTube, you can look for conscious discipline, I love you rituals. They also post a lot of video examples on their Instagram. Some of those I love you rituals that are based more off the nursery rhymes can feel a little bit like young. So if you work with older elementary, middle school, high school kids, they might be like, I'm not doing that. So there's a game called like a hand clap game called Boom Snap Clap. You can look that up on YouTube too. That can be really fun. It's not the same sort of cutesy nursery rhyme deal, but you have eye contact, touch, presence, and a playful situation. So that's all we're looking for in those face-to-face games to really increase that felt sense of connection. Things like Miss Mary Mac. I don't know if you guys know that, like double this, double that thing. I had a kindergartner once tell me that my I love you ritual was for babies. And I was like, well, do you have any other ideas? And he taught me high five, down low, in the middle, cut the pickle, and then you would cut it, tickle, tickle. And I was like, okay, that's the same. It's the same. We're just talking about a pickle instead of, twinkle, twinkle, little star. So I think what's more important is remembering those ingredients for connection. So again, eye contact, touch, presence, and playfulness. And when you've got all of those wrapped up in that moment, the quality and that felt sense of connection is really boosted.
Yep. And it looks like we have about 3 or 4 more minutes. There was a question to hit on perseverance and a question to hit on prioritization.
I think, yes, this. Okay, so let's talk about that the goal persistence and achievement, I think is what they're referring to, just being able to see something through. So making commitments, a commitment is an agreement that I make with myself. So this week, I'm going to finish my homework by Thursday. Encouraging steps towards that goal, any little bit of progress is super helpful. So, hey, you finished 20 minutes of reading, you're almost done with that book, or you picked up the book and sat down on the couch to get cozy to start your reading. It's that encouragement of highlighting and noticing those steps towards it. I think about it. Oh yeah, I have this. I don't know why I picked a picture of the Packers, but that idea of celebrating each little bit towards that ultimate goal. It's the same thing that we do when we're cheering at a football game, right? Imagine how bizarre it would be if you went to a football game and there was nothing from the crowd except for when somebody finally scored a touchdown. If you're only celebrating that very end goal, we want to be celebrating every little bit on the way. So, the ball moves 6 inches down the field and everybody's going nuts. So we want to apply that same level of thinking to really encouraging that progress towards a goal. Positive feedback, you did it, you've got this, you're doing it. Again, starting with smaller goals and moving to bigger goals. I talked a little bit about that with task initiation too. It's just making that sort of bite-sized piece and then building on that momentum. Visual charts to show progress. We do that with like fundraising. If you think about coloring in that, thermometer, so that it makes it more concrete, that progress that we're making, and then celebrating goals. What was the other one, Josh?
Prioritization.
First, then is really helpful. Any sort of visual, a lot of our kids really rely on visuals, giving directions and steps. So like first this, then this, then this. 1 or 2 step commands can really help to break it down and focus that attention to what's going on right here. Role playing and adding contrast is sort of, it's time to get dressed, first we put on our pants and then our underwear? Or do we do underwear and then pants? So it brings in that playful element too and helps it solidify in kids' brains of like, oh, well, of course I wouldn't do that. Or like it's time to, it's time to get started with our arts and crafts. First, we're going to put the markers away and then we're going to color. Wait, no, first we're going to color and then we'll put the markers away. So that sort of thing. And then breaking projects down into smaller parts for teens. I talked a little bit about that too with task initiation.
Great. So I think we will end there. Ellen, did you have a final slide you wanted to show?
Yeah. So if you're looking for any conscious discipline resources, you can find them here. If you're looking specifically for some of these executive functioning resources, you can search Executive Skills Lending Library on Conscious Discipline's website. And that will take you to some of these resources. They also have the lending library for 0 to 3. So if you work with really little kids, you can still be working to build those executive functioning skills. And then my contact info is also here. If you have follow-up questions, are looking for any other resources, then you can always reach out.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. I am just going to go ahead and share my screen. I think everyone can see it. Yep. So with that, we are going to go ahead and finish up. As a reminder, a copy of the presentation PowerPoint is available in the chat, and the link will be emailed to you as well. Please, please, please sign up for our weekly update newsletter. This is the best way to get information on events that we have coming up, as well as updates on youth issues, professional education, and organizational capacity opportunities. Upcoming webinars and summits. Next month, we are going to finish out our year with webinars with navigating the digital landscape, social media, and youth mental health. And then we have a large virtual event coming up May 7th, our Advancing Equity Summit. Our keynote for that is Dr. Dina Suskin, which we are really excited about. The schedule is also available on the registration site, so please go to IYI.org/events to check those out. We're really excited about those. And then finally, as we conclude, I just want to thank you for joining us today and for attending. I want to thank Ellen for the webinar. We really appreciate all the work that you do for youth, and we value your voice and are just grateful that you made the choice to learn with us today. Outside of the PowerPoint, in the email follow-up that you get, there will be a link to complete an evaluation. Please take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about today's presentation. If you don't receive that, check your junk mail or reach out to one of us. We really take that feedback seriously about what kind of content we are providing in webinars and summits and conferences. Additionally, you have to fill out that evaluation to receive your certificate of completion. So that concludes our presentation. And on behalf of Indiana's youth, thank you so much again for showing up today and every day for Indiana youth.